Now we have our two guests joining us right on time, Halsey and Nick Fuentes. How are you doing?
Can't complain.
I can complain a lot. I don't know if you've been watching, but I've been having real difficulty with my internet, so I didn't even get to do my show today.
Oh, really? That's sad.
I'm not happy, so I'm not a happy camper right now. But I'm excited to be on with you. Excited to be here for the conversation.
Now, I'm sorry to you too. My windows were not prepared, so I'm just gonna take a little time to adjust my windows so that the crowd can see you both. While I do that, Halsey, can you explain to me the context of this debate and what we would be talking about?
It's not as much a debate as I saw Nick's speech at the American Renaissance Conference about the differences between Generation Z and the baby boomer generation. And I happen to see a lot of similarities between the two. Not necessarily bad similarities, but I see a lot of similarities between the two, especially when you start with the beginning of the baby boomer generation to the end of it. It says that like most sources say, social scientists say that the beginning of the baby boomer generation were largely Democrats, and the end of the generation were largely Republicans. They started to return to religion. They started to return to tradition. They started railing against things like abortion, homosexuality, things that would be considered non-traditional. And I see the same thing in Generation Z, in that you have this movement from the ultra-liberal millennials into a much more conservative base of Generation Z. And I see this kind of coinciding with Trump and Reagan, in that the baby boomers pretty much brought Reagan about after Carter. And we've basically brought Trump about. I'm not Generation Z or a boomer. I'm actually Gen X. But, we saw Trump be brought about because of Obama. And I wanted to talk to Nick about it because, I mean, you could see I've been on maybe 10 streams lately where I've done nothing but praise the speech. I think it was a phenomenal speech. And I'd like to see what Nick thinks about these things. So.
Well, thank you, Halsey. I was, I think to the surprise probably of the audience, I think we have grown pretty friendly compared to when we were on originally. It was pretty hostile. If I recall the first couple of exchanges, it was less than pleasant. But no, I think we've simmered down. And ironically, after all the e-drama and everything, you'd think like the last two people to bring about like a civil conversation would be us, but here we are. But I appreciate that. I appreciate the compliments about the speech. And, I tend to agree with you just about the boomers in general, that I think a lot of people lay the problems at the feet of the boomers and they say, oh, they're the cause of everything. And I said very explicitly in my speech that I don't think you can totally blame the boomers, in that we are all to a degree subject to the forces of history, in the sense that, the boomers were raised by a generation. The boomers were subject to forces beyond their control, whether that be technological, social, historical, cultural, and otherwise. I don't think you could totally blame, for example, boomers for feminism, when at the same time you had all kinds of labor-saving devices introduced to the home, like you had in the 1950s, and you had birth control and contraception and all the rest. So you see those kinds of trends, and it's not totally surprising that you saw in ascendant feminist coalitions. So I don't totally blame them so much as I blame these kinds of trends that went on, and we maybe learn from their mistakes. We learned some from the areas where maybe they were blindsided or they were bad stewards. And so, I would slightly push back on the idea that Trump would be comparable to Reagan. And one of the things I talked about in the speech was, a lot of people, a lot of defenders of the boomers, if there are any, they'll say, well, the boomers didn't cause the present problem because the 1965 Immigration Act passed when the last boomers were being born, right? I mean, the last boomers, I think, was 1964, was the last year that you could qualify as boomers. And so, they couldn't really be passing the Immigration Act. The oldest ones wouldn't have even been, they would have been, what, 15, 20 years old, actually? They wouldn't be in Congress passing it or even voting on it, for that matter, a lot of them. But, and I pointed out in the speech, the big problem was not the Immigration Act being passed, was not a lot of these trends that started to gain traction a long time before. And you could go as far back as the 20s, and even before then, you saw a lot of these trends begin. But I said in the speech very, very clearly, the problem was that they fell asleep at the wheel in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Once things started to change in a very bad direction, once you saw socially and demographically, a lot of these nasty and ugly and evil things going on. I think the boomers were far more concerned with material wealth, with themselves, and in this kind of a freewheeling attitude than they were with how do we maintain civilization. And again, that's not to say every boomer's a bad person. They're bad people. Like, they did that deliberately. I think it's kind of hard to assign blame when you're talking about a big generation, these big trends. But I do think that's why we say the boomer generation has been a disaster, whether it's their fault or not their fault. I mean, that is a generation that basically let it go when it started to get really bad. So that was really my main gripe with the boomers.
So I had seen it.
I'm pretty surprised as a host because last time I saw Nick and Halsey, Nick pulled a knife on Halsey and called him a fat boomer. His discourse as unradicalized so fast, it's quite impressive. But go ahead, Halsey.
So, I mean, I noticed that when you look at the beginning of the boomer generation, and even right up almost until 1964, the defining events of that time were Cold War events. You know what I'm saying? They were the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were the idea that communism was going to either win or at least remain at parity with democracy. And I've been looking into the 65, obviously, from all my debates, and it gets thrown in my face so often. I've been looking into it quite a bit. And you have to look at like the kind of intention. The intention was that America was this amazing place with unlimited resources, and communism was this horrible place which was dreary and evil and going to kill off the entire planet. So the idea was that you could bring these people, especially like the kind of higher class people, into America to make America even better because our immigration policies were so lax and the Soviet Unions were so strong. You know, it was almost like yin and yang. And then it somehow got exploited as it was going on for political purposes. You know, like we can import voters, we can import labor, we can import all of the things that we don't like. And I put this right at the boomers' feet as well, because in the 80s with Reagan, greed was good. You know what I'm saying? It didn't matter what was going on as long as it increased the bottom line. And Reagan had other things on his mind. He wanted a good economy, but he wanted to defeat the Soviet Union. You know what I'm saying? That was going to be his mark. And I think he made that clear from the beginning. And I mean, he cucked on a lot of things. He cucked on abortion. He cucked on a lot of family policies that he had really ran on that he saw were a disaster in California when he was governor. And now we had Obama, who I think was 10 times worse than Carter could have pretty much ever been. And now we've got Trump, and we're laying a lot at the millennials' feet now. You know what I'm saying? Like we're saying the millennials are fucking things up bad. They brought on Obama. They're for open borders. They actually want to be Europe in a sense, even though they're oblivious to what's going on in Europe. But I also see Generation Z as taking this sharp right turn, but in a much more logical way. You know, as long as I don't read the chat. If I read the chat, then I fear for the future. But you know what I'm saying? As long as I see what's going on, and I mean, I lecture at colleges and stuff sometimes. And we talk about these things, about the rise of conservative values, the return to religion, the return to families, the return to children, the return to owning property, which was something people always say to me, you know, white people discovered America. I actually say that they're not right. It was white landowning fathers that discovered America, that built America into what it was. They had something to lose. You know what I'm saying? When you're willing to go to war for your kids and war for your land, it means something. And I saw this parallel and I was like, is Nick just missing the point a little bit? And you kind of got there anyway. So that's why I was like, I got to have a talk with him about this and just see what are your opinions on what's next?
Oh yeah, well that's a great question in terms of Generation Z, and it's tough to say because you know at once you can look at a lot of the numbers, and I pointed that out in the speeches. You can look at a lot of the numbers in terms of they are liberal. You know, you look at Generation Z and it is liberal in terms of on homosexuality, abortion, the social issues, which I think are a pretty good barometer, a pretty good gauge of where they're at. And they are liberal. You know, they're about as liberal as millennials. But if you look at similar numbers, it says they're less enthusiastic about these things. And so kind of where do you go with that? Because once you have numbers that say that church attendance is back up, that they believe in, they're having a lot less casual sex, a lot less drug use than previous generations and all the rest. So you have these kind of two ideas where at once they're kind of as liberal, they're in a very liberal system, and you just talk to a lot of them and it can be disappointing. But then you look at the numbers and some other numbers and it says they're traditional. And I think it's kind of, I got to be honest, I think it's kind of a toss-up. because I know that there are a lot of Generation Z people, and I hope that's not a cop-out, but there are a lot of Generation Z people who I believe are intuitively and instinctively pining for what you're talking about in terms of, and you're so on the money in terms of the people that founded the country being white, Christian, landowning fathers who came here and they had something to lose and they went to war for it and they put down their roots, because it's so true. It's about responsibility. It's about tradition. It's about all those actually conservative things, actually right-wing things, as opposed to, like, you know, drag queens at free speech rallies, actual conservative right-wing things. And I think that Generation Z, as somebody of the generation and knowing lots of people in it, all my peers are Generation Z and younger, and a lot of people that watch my show are Generation Z and you know, around that high school and college age. They are pining for that old world in ways where they look at, for example, hookup culture. And that's something that I brought up in the speech, where very instinctively people understand there's something wrong with shallow, carnal relationships that are ubiquitous in this day and age, where it's, you know, beep, beep, boop, you find somebody on Tinder and then you meet up and you do whatever. And there's something missing there. There's something not quite right there. You know, people will look at their lives where they go to college and they go on to work. And, for example, a lot of women don't get encouraged to start families. And a lot of men can't start families because the women are not into that. And, you know, the cost of housing and all the rest is crazy, and college is crazy, and wages are stagnating. And you look at people that are coming up in this system and they're depressed, they're sad. And so they turn to drugs and alcohol. And a lot of that is an expression of, I think, like a God-sized hole in people's lives, that they're missing the fundamental parts there. And so I think it remains to be seen how that plays out in the future. I think that's kind of what comes next, is how is this reconciled? Are we able to rebuild those kinds of social structures, social institutions, social norms, those kinds of things that society is built on? Are we able to bring back those traditions, and can Generation Z reassert them? Or will it just be kind of an aimless, wandering, surrealist generation? It's kind of tough, and it remains to be seen. I think a lot of it is political, a lot of it is cultural, but you know, it's pretty tough to say one way or the other, because, as you know, there is cultural domination by people who want to see it go in the wrong direction. You know, the people that are coming up nowadays are watching television, movies brought up by teachers in primary, high school, and college who have very warped views. The music industry is controlled by these people. And so at once you have all these people being brought up in a system by other people that want to see them go down the wrong path, which is towards degeneracy, towards hedonism, towards the path we've been on for a long time. And at the same time, there's this natural, I think, resistance to this that is building. And you see it in the milquetoast, like campus conservatism. I think you see it maybe most prominently in a guy like Jordan Peterson, who is at the most basic level expressing some kind of a father figure sentiment, like, hey, take responsibility, clean your room. And people they go bananas. They pay $160 to see him in theaters. They support him on Patreon. He's making $1 million a year. So I think that the institutional forces are against us, but I think that the people are with us. The feeling is there, and it'll be a battle. We'll see who wins, right?
So from the beginning of the conversation, it seems that you two have agreed on the role of the boomer generation, on the symptoms, if you will, the political symptoms, the openness to immigration, the lack of identity. But Halsey, do you follow Nick in concluding that the source of all of these symptoms, or a large part of these symptoms, is essentially the abandonment of God?
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with that, 100%. But there was a reason, call it Talmudic trickery, if you will. There was a reason that I really wanted to discuss this with Nick, because it was my discussion with Nick in the first place that had me actually looking into this. I don't like it when people throw a statistic in my face and I don't really have enough information to either counter it or agree. And we were talking about leaders in the different religious communities, in the Catholic community and the Jewish community and the Protestant community. And we were talking about all of that. And I said my opinions, but I didn't have the full story on what was going on. And I started looking into it a little more, and I started noticing the trend when I was looking at all of the social science statistics. The leaders of the Jewish community, the leaders of the Catholic community, the leaders of, minus the evangelicals, the entire Protestant community, are very leftist. But the adherents are becoming further rightists. The people who are leading the churches themselves, won't give communion to people who support abortion. Whereas, the Pope has kind of backed off on it. The immigration debate is raging in the Catholic churches. They do not want open borders. They see open borders as a threat to the Catholic Church in both Europe and here. The Jewish leaders, while the vast majority of the vocal out there leaders are incredibly liberal, they're open borders freaks. But when you look at the more religious local communities, these are people that are rated at 93% support for President Trump and 92% support for closed borders. And I'm looking into this more and more, and I'm noticing the congregations are getting younger. The people who used to go to church and used to follow blindly aren't going anymore. They've either decided they've had their fill, or that they've learned enough, or it's not for them. But the younger generations are rejecting that, and they're rejecting that en masse. Private school to attendance way up, and I mean religious private school. And they're accepting diktats that people who have been accepted for 30 years, like that women will not wear pants to school. They'll wear skirts. You know what I'm saying? That they're not going to wear shirts that don't cover their elbows. This is like becoming a thing again, and it's happening organically. I'm noticing it more and more and more. And that's why I wanted to ask Nick, like, what are you seeing from the other side? Because I obviously see it from the Orthodox Jewish side, so I don't see it from the Christian side. So what do you see with those type of things?
Yeah, well, I think religion, it's no secret, I believe, that religion is fundamental to this kind of conservative or traditional revival, because I know a lot of people that are conservative, right-wing people, and without God, I don't really see the motivation in them or even in a coherent way for their own ideology to really make things happen. And so I believe religion's fundamental. I think Christianity, Catholicism in particular, is fundamental to that. And I'll say that you're basically right in terms of the leadership is at a very different place than the people. And the Catholic Church is probably the most visible example of this, because unlike the Jews and unlike the Protestants, the Catholic Church is very explicitly and very visibly hierarchical. Unlike the Protestants, we have a guy who wears the big hat and makes the rules. Well, he doesn't make the rules, but you know what I mean by this. He's the vicar of Christ on earth and all of that. And it's very telling because, of course, he is, by all intents and purposes, a left-leaning pope in terms of his politics. He talks about openness for migrants, and he has been relatively liberal. I say relatively because, people say, oh, he's for homosexuality, he's for abortion. The doctrine hasn't changed, and I don't think it will. But he's expressed some more sympathetic things, borderline heretical things, which are problematic, which that's a whole other rabbit hole. But while he's been over on the left, you see that a lot of the Catholics that are coming up, the young Catholics that I talk to on Twitter, the most radical, well, I shouldn't even say radical, maybe just the most common sense, traditional Orthodox Catholics, they're not old guys. They're not like bearded, fuddy-duddy old geezers. They're young guys. They're in their 20s. They're in Europe and they're in America. And so I don't know if this is symptomatic of the rest of the population, but certainly I think that there is definitely something going on. I think the internet is a part of it, maybe, because we can communicate these ideas where before, if your teacher wasn't teaching it to you, if you were like a Gen X person, for example, or an older millennial, if you're growing up and you're coming of age in school and you're not being exposed to Aquinas and Augustine and like traditionalist Catholic literature, you're not going to search that out unless you're like some kind of a weird nerd or something. But if you're online, you do get exposed to that. So I think that's a part of it, but it's definitely coming back in a big way. And I think religious people are getting fed up because, the whole point, the draw of religion, the appeal, the utility of religion is in its tradition, is in its orthodoxy. I mean, the whole point of having a church is to resist the tide of modernism and change and dynamism and all of that and progress. And because we don't really like progress, to be honest, we don't really even believe in it. And so when people don't get that from their church, when people don't get this haven from a very changing, chaotic, surrealist, and meaningless world, they get upset. And I think that's what's happening. I think you see a big pushback from people who say, we came to the church not to hear this crap about how, actually everybody's cool. We should tolerate degeneracy and all the rest. Like, we came to hear how we're going to get to heaven, how we're going to get saved, how we can please God and all the rest. And so I think it's happening. It's tough to say, though, because I am in a bubble. So from my perspective, you say, how do I see it from my side? I see a rise of a conservatism that's happening, but it's tough to say how universal that'll be in the future, if that'll pick up steam. A lot of potential, but remains to be seen how it'll play out.
So I had an odd experience. My business partner, she's Canadian, right? She's young too. She's only like 25. And she's always been very right wing, but she had a moving experience and she discovered Catholicism, you know, and this was recently, this was only a couple months ago. And she since has become like I wouldn't say a zealot, but she's very, very adamant that Catholicism is the right way. And she's joined a writing team that writes against abortion, and she goes to rallies, and she's always looking to help people and talk to people. And this transformation was like amazing to watch. There was another transformation that I also saw, and this was a result of obviously Gab's proliferation in the face of Twitter censorship. And that was the conference itself, the American Renaissance Conference. Paul Nehlen was supposed to be there. And I know people blamed you for some reason for him not showing up, right? Mm-hmm. But then I noticed what was at the American Renaissance Conference. I've watched every speech. I've seen people like Jared Taylor for years. You know what I'm saying? Like, everybody that spoke talked solutions. They said, where are we going from here? And what can we do as white people, or as, you know, Americans, or anything? And I've always said, people confuse this, that they say, when I talked to Enoch, I was against white nationalism. And then when I talked to someone else, I said I was a white nationalist. I didn't say I was a white nationalist. I said I support white nationalism. I wouldn't want to live in a white ethno-state because I don't define myself by my whiteness. But I think it would be a good thing if it were able to come up at some point, right? But I'm watching these things from American Renaissance, and I'm thinking, you know, they don't censor basically any organization except for this one organization that consistently talks solutions. You know, Jared Taylor, I mean, he's what, probably in his 60s or 70s at this point. He has the balls to walk into Howard University and debate someone on whether the civil rights movement was a disaster or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, this guy's got a pair of balls, and he's doing this. And I'm watching this and I'm going, now, how come we can't move the country in this direction? How come it's so hard to get these messages out without pissing people off? Because they're not so revolutionary. They're not things that are so amazing. And it's because of the attack on the family. You know, the left has consistently attacked the family from day one. Why do you think every kid can be trans? Every kid can be gay? You know, they can't, you know, get a gun, or they can't join the army, or they can't drive a car, but they can get hormone blocking therapy at 5 years old. You know, the attack on the family has just consistently been there. And it's frightening to me, but not personally, because I have a very large family. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, and my kids go to private religious school. Like, I mean, I would rather eat out of a trash can and pay their tuition than let them go to public school. So where do you see these solutions as being something that can actually happen? That's kind of where I wanted to go with that.
Sure. Well, you know, it's tough because, of course, the institutional control is something that has eluded people of our persuasion for a long time. I mean, and we know, as we debated previously, which group kind of has a little bit of play in the institutions, whether it be media, Hollywood, the music industry, and all the rest. And it's one of those things where I think it's, you know, the question is, how do we get control of those? How do we get control of the reins there? Because the problem is, it wants the destruction of the family, but it's also sort of the adoption of the children by the state, by the corporations. I mean, you think about how a child was raised maybe 50 or 60 years ago, and they went to a local school, and they went to local school for education, by the way. They went there to learn math and reading. They didn't go there to learn liberation theology and social justice and morals. And they also weren't in daycare most of the time either. You know, they were raised by their parents. And then when they went to school, it was community people, and the community was involved. They were raised by the neighbors. It was very tight-knit, and all the rest, depending on where you look at. In small-town America, this is broadly what it was like. And now what you have is that children are not really raised by their parents anymore. They're raised by the public school teachers, or they're raised by the daycare people. They're raised by the music that they listen to, the movies they watch, the entertainment and media they consume. And so when you're thinking about how do we transform the country, how do we change people's minds, well, you have to think about people. And you have to think about how people get their ideas, how people become the way that they are. And by and large, you know, we're a product of our childhood. When we grow up, from the time we're born until the time we're an adult, and even after, when we're a little bit older, through college and through into the workforce, we are basically force-fed a diet that is regulated, by a very particular group of people. You call them leftists. Some might call them something else. Some might call them various names.
I don't have a problem saying that Jews.
I would never say it's Jews. It's globalists. It's globalists. Yeah, right.
Those globalists. Listen, I have never once stood up for the left-wing Jews that are in the media. I have a valid explanation as to why their numbers are so high, and it took a lot of research. It took me a very long time to do the numbers and find out that the representation actually isn't such an overrepresentation.
Is
and I'll
it
go into
IQ?
it with you. No, it has nothing to do.
Okay.
I'm not going to give the Jordan Peterson of, oh, there's 5 traits or whatever. The only explanation that I can give is even Andrew Anglin estimates that Jewish representation in the media is about 25%. 25% of B-level jobs and higher are occupied by Jews, right? The only way that a statistical model works where you say 2% of the population makes up 25% of the media is if the media is logically spread evenly throughout the entire country. It's not. Every single major media hub is in New York City, where Jews are 23%. So when you look at the fact that every single major media hub, Fox News, NBC, all the public broadcasting channels, most of the cable channels, all of the international news are in New York City, where Jews make up 23%, and that's not counting the suburbs. Also, it's the most expensive media market in the entire country. They're going to play to the media market that pays them the most, and New York City is more liberal than California. So when you look at those two things, is it evil? Absolutely. Are the Jews that are in the media participating in this evil? Absolutely. But the statistical overrepresentation is not so dramatic that it's 2% of the population, yet 25% of the media.
Very interesting. I've never been confronted to this argument, so I will not comment. But what I'll do is I'll carry your argument to Kevin McDonald, who will be here on Saturday on the public space.
I've talked to him about it.
I
talk to Kevin McDonald in DM sometimes.
What's his response?
Interesting. I'll look into it. But we haven't talked in a while. But he said to me at the time, interesting, I'll look into it. But as I said, there was a lot of like fireworks on Luke's show with Kofnis and him and all of that. And he's kind of disengaged from like just talking, you know, to just people in private. I think he's afraid people are going to like take those conversations and screenshot them. Tree of Logic did that to him. Yeah. Like had a long conversation with him in DM and then basically screenshotted the whole thing and said, oh, look at this cuck. He won't do this and this. So I think he's being more careful. But there was a while where he talked. He's actually a very reasonable guy. He's not such an asshole, like where he's like, no, this is my way or whatever. Like when Kofnis came out with his paper and I asked him what he thought of it, he said, I won't comment on it until I've done the research to reply. You know, and once he did, he said, he even sent me a copy like a day before he posted. He said, what do you think? You know, he's actually a very nice guy. I disagree with him on most things, but he's just a very nice guy.
Now, I think that a lot of what we've been discussing up to now revolves around information control. And both the dramatic state of the boomer generations and the hope that we can see in future generations, I think revolves around what kind of informational environment we raise our children in. And when you talk to someone who's above 40 or 50 years old, you can feel it. They come from a completely different world than us who are connected on the internet and who follow the idea of the right on the internet. So about this information control, do you think that it will just improve by itself, Nick, out of the simple fact that we are on the internet, that now individuals are taking over entire sectors that used to be organized by mainstream media? Or do we have to actively seek more solutions than those that emerge naturally right now?
Well, yeah. I mean, that gets to the broader point I was trying to make about how do we make these things come about? And you're right in terms of it is about information. It is about control over the mediums of communication for these kinds of ideas. And you know, McLuhan was a great thinker about this. I encourage everybody, because it's a very little read author this day and age. I don't know why, but it took me a while to hear of a McLuhan. That's how it's spelled. But he wrote a lot about media and how media really does control in this day and age the direction of society. He called it the medium is the message. That was the adage he coined. But, I think it has to be a very active and grassroots campaign, in the sense that people are looking towards these grand political designs of, well, we need to take over the country, or there has to be this dramatic revolution, or we have to do this, that, and the other. And I would never discount political reform as a means to an end. But what we have to do is get people, children in particular, back under the care of normal people, not the lizard people in media. So that means that, for example, Halsey says he's putting his kids in private school. Great. That's the kind of thing that's going to change the balance. I have it in my head that if people who are aware of these kinds of things homeschool their kids or put them in private school, they limit the amount of media that they consume from the corporations, or maybe they get their media from somewhere else. If regular people basically just take charge and assert that responsibility, I think that will do a lot in the way of making a movement. It's all about snowballing. I wouldn't sit here and tell you, I've got a design, I've got a plan for how we're going to make it all okay, because this is rarely how these things work in history. In all great movements, whether it's the Bolsheviks or anybody else, nobody sits around a table and says, this is how we're going to plot how we would create the Soviet Union, or how we would create, this great empire. It tends to work bit by bit. It tends to work a little bit differently. So I would say that if we take those kinds of steps towards reclaiming localism, reclaiming our communities, reclaiming our families, I think that would do a lot in the way of building some kind of network, building some kind of base for the change that we need to see more broadly. Because you talk about these major media corporations and social media companies. You can engage in lawfare, you can engage in political reform, but by and large, you're not going to be able to get a traditionalist Catholic Caesar in control of all the media, or in control of Hollywood, or anything like that. So we have to think in more creative ways. We have to think in more indirect ways. How can we best beat back this legacy system? How can we best beat back this institutionalized big money system? And I think it's just through localism, through communities. And that's how it starts, in my view.
I just noticed a lot of people in the chat are asking why I send to private school and I don't homeschool. My wife has dyscalculia. It's like dyslexia for math. So she doesn't feel comfortable educating the kids, because if she educates them wrong, she would feel responsible for them not getting the right education. So we don't homeschool for that reason. But she doesn't work. It's not because we can't. She stays home with my kids. So I'm just answering because a lot of people in the chat are asking why I don't homeschool.
My girlfriend is also dyslexic. We have a few super chats that we could read. Sharia Scientist says, I will not read this one. Swift says, Emmanuel Seller made it his life mission to revoke the 1921 Immigration Act because it barred Jews. Have to know this to understand the 1965 Act. Zoe Hunt says, if Christianity is so cohesive for whites, why is there hundreds of denominations? That does not seem cohesive at all. I feel that this is a question for Nick.
Yo, that's just dumb. That's why we embrace Catholicism. When you're a Protestant and you have this hubris, you have this arrogance that says, oh, we don't need some ecclesiastical authority. We'll just make up the rules as we go along. We can read the Bible any way we want. Well, that's when you get the fracture. That's when you get the split in all these denominations. So the answer to that question is submit to Rome, embrace the Catholic Church. That's the way forward for Christians.
Absolutely. Nicker Bloodlust says, we need an alt-right Zionist alliance. I don't know that we need that. Mark Nanneman says, Nick, anti-Pope Francis is a heretic and fake pope. We've had almost 50 anti-popes in Catholic history. You reject them, elect a true one, and move on. What do you think about this, Nick?
That's just simply not how it works. I love all these Catholics who they think it's like a civilian government. They think it's like the president. We don't like this Pope, we'll vote for a new one. That's not how it works. The Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, protected from error by God. And so when people say, oh, I disagree with what he said about politics, I claim he's heretical. That defeats the whole point of Christ establishing a church on earth. If you can invalidate it or veto that, as a layman, because you don't like what he said about politics. So I agree. Look, and trust me, I'm not wild about everything he said. I've had my criticisms of him before on my show, which people are well aware of. But just to say that, oh, he's illegitimate, I say he's illegitimate, it's just kind of an ignorant thing to say.
What a convinced brain. I don't know how you live with yourself as a nihilist Frenchman. I cannot even conceive the idea of unfallibility, but it's beautiful to see you argue for it. Joey Gojan says, 1488 has horrible optics for the whole movement, which is understated. What are your thoughts, Nick and Halsey, on this? The fact that I've seen that a lot on my chat, people saying 1488. Is that a problem? Is that something we should fight? Is that something we should ignore? Or is that something we should endorse?
You could start. I have my own ideas.
Sure. Yeah. Well, with the whole, I think a lot of what has been done in the past just has to be scrapped. I think so much of the old stuff, the WN 1.0, even the alt-right stuff, it just has to be scrapped entirely for the sole reason that it hasn't worked. I think people, they have this weird attachment to things that don't work, and that's really problematic. Some of the lessons we can learn from the Zionists, and if you read about them, it's fascinating. Not because, look, and we have our issues with Israel and our aid for them, but, just purely speaking from an objective point of view in terms of they had an incredible goal, a pretty fantastic goal, which was when Turkey controlled Palestine, they said, we want to put down a Jewish homeland there. And they accomplished that in 50 years. And it was through ruthless pragmatism. And we have to embrace the same method. So this I don't know, that we're wedded to the optics of 1488 and Adolf Hitler and, or this broader movement the alt-right has for so long, it sets us back a long way, and it becomes an obstacle to the real objective. I think people would rather, it's like they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have their goals, but they also want all their favorite icons and figures rehabilitated. And, you can't do them at the same time. If you're going to spend a lot of time rehabilitating certain figures or whatever, it's going to come at the cost and the detriment of pursuing real power and discharging real influence. So I think it has to be scrapped in favor of just pro-America Christian optics. And that's, that's been the position for a long time.
Oh, I think that we're not hearing you, Halsey. You are muted.
I didn't unmute. I'm sorry. There was something interesting you had said about a Christian Zionist kind of alliance. I think that's a very, very bad idea, because I think ethnocentrism and ethno-nationalism thrives best when left alone. That the worst thing that can happen on an ethnic movement is outside influence and outside pressure, because it will never be that both groups' interests completely align. The whole purpose of ethno-nationalism is that their interests don't align with other ethnicities. So I understand people's criticism of Israel. I don't agree with it. And I can say it's a country like any others. Of course, there's going to have problems. They're going to have good things and bad things and whatever. But I would personally like to see America and the Christian world basically leave Israel alone and just not try to get involved in Israeli politics, for good or for bad. I don't think America should be giving Israel aid. I think it's a bad deal for Israel. I think it stifles their growth. I think welfare in any form stifles growth. And I think that if Israel were allowed to build its own military industries and its own technology industries independent of America, but as a trade partner, it would be better off than giving any kind of aid to Israel in order to accomplish financial needs. It also promotes the deep state military industrial complex, which is not a good thing. But in America, we have the same thing. We have people that have ethnic movements. They have ethnic groups, whether they be Christian, whether they be Catholic. And the majority of America is majority white. If you look at LA, then yes, you're wrong. Whites are absolutely a minority, and will probably continue to be so for a very long time. Chicago, kind of. New York, pretty much. But when you look at the majority of America, the white majorities are overwhelming. And it was funny because I was looking at a poll of what people think of Jewish influence in America, and there was a percentage that didn't like it. There was a percentage that did like it. And there was a huge percentage of people that said they didn't have an opinion because they've never met a Jew. And these are all Americans. They live in places where there just are no Jews, and they had no opinion, good or bad, because they never even gave it any thought. And that's something that white people can learn from and are accomplishing in the places where you see the deepest support for President Trump, the deepest support for curbing immigration, the deepest support for fighting communism. These are the places where white majorities already exist, and they're big. You know what I'm saying? They're not just these little pockets of land that are overcrowded in apartments without the ability to like own your own piece of America, without your ability to build your own business. These are the places where white people can grow and thrive because they already are. You know, these are the places where an education still matters because there aren't so much overcrowding of jobs with useless college degrees like gender studies and garbage like that. Like if you get a welding certificate, like you're in demand. There's over 1 million skilled labor jobs in America that are unfilled because no one can fill them. There's not enough people. So I just see that, yes, what can white people learn something from Zionism? For sure. Because Zionism, like you said, it established what they were looking to in a very short period of time in a very hostile place. Generation Z, I think, are getting to that. They're realizing that just taking a mortgage at 20% because someone says, here's some free money, is not worth it if you can't pay it back because you'll never own what you're paying on. They're saying, I'm not going to go $150,000 in debt to go to college for a degree that isn't going to make me more than 45 grand a year when I get out. And I actually said this last night, so it's no secret. I said, I see people like Nick and people like JF. JF went through college to you have your doctorate, right?
Absolutely.
I know that, right? But you've decided that your life is going to make a difference here, as opposed to trying to just be involved in whatever path you thought was the right one from the beginning. You know, like this is what I see Generation Z doing. And it's not just a pipe dream. They're actually doing it. People are saying, I'll be comfortable making decent money as opposed to making a lot of money. That's why I wrote you the super chat before. I didn't say everybody now wants jobs. I said a lot of people who would disagree with Mike Enoch would say that I'm more interested in a job than what he has to say. But I'm just saying that it just seems that a lot of people right now are chasing their dreams, and those dreams are actually bringing them to the same place of kind of an American, I want to say unity, but it seems a little cheesy, you know, but that's what I see. So to say 1488, even if it had validity or no validity, it's a European German ideal. That is not an American ideal. You know what I'm saying? If you want Germany, you can go to Germany. It's still there. I mean, there's probably a great apartment building you can move into with some beautiful Muslim neighbors, you know, but if that's what you want, go there. It's not an American ideal. It never has been, and it probably never will be.
I've actually had the mainstream newspaper ask me this question 2 days ago. They're making an article about me in Quebec, and they were like, what about your fans who write 1488? I'm not a leader, and I'm not, like, you should not follow me, and you should not think that I'm the right guy to decide for your movement, however you define it. That being said, I see myself as a broker of ID and a mad scientist. And so my answer to the 1488 question is, first, I'm autistic as can be, and I don't care about optics. Secondly, the 14 words, they say stuff that mentions the right of the existence of white people to continue existing. So their right to continue existing. And what I explained to this newspaper is, if you find any problem with the 14 words, the words themselves and their meaning, you are essentially calling for the genocide of white people. Now, on the Hail Hitler, I used a little bit of my mad scientist approach to the world, and I explained, look, there are people who want to salute Adolf Hitler on YouTube right now. Do I object to it? Well, it depends. Saying I to Hitler, does it mean that Hitler has done everything right? No. But what it means is that there is a segment of the population on YouTube who say, I want to have some memory for the man Adolf Hitler because some of his goals might have been demonized in modern times, and not everything that he's done and not everything that he's wanted was wrong. And that's what I explained to the newspaper. It is, look, first, they are Americans, those who use these numbers, I think, on my channel. And so they have a right to claim their own existence, and they have a right to call for the memory of a man who they find maybe had some good ideas.
I don't think there's any leader that's devoid of good ideas. You know, it's very rare that you find, and I'm not praising Hitler. What I'm saying is that there's no such thing as a leader of a nation, especially one that survives more than 6 months, you know, where every single thing that they ever said was just completely off the wall and stupid. Otherwise, literally no one would follow them. There'd be no like even the military, no one's that rich, you know, that you can just buy a military and say, that's it, I'm taking over. But again, you judge things on its totality, you know, like, did Hitler bring Germany out of a raging recession? Absolutely. But left it just as bad as he found it. You know, they were defeated in a world war by an allied power that was much stronger. They made military blunders which cost them millions of lives and, you know, billions of dollars in treasure. So the end result was not a good one. Regardless of the war crimes that were committed, the end result was that Germany was not in a better place than it was before the war. You know what I'm saying? So any leader, I think, can be judged on that level. And if you want to say, oh, this one had a good idea, sure. Everybody has good ideas and good intentions sometimes. But it does, if you look at the totality, that's what matters.
Well, and the trick is with Hitler is that the mythology of Hitler is so important in the present political conversation. So, you know, while it is bad optics, there does have to be a reconciliation with the fact that 70 or 80 years later, we're still living in the shadow of this ideological fight between the Marxists, the Bolsheviks, and the fascists or the Nazis. And so while I would never go out there saying 88 or anything like that, of course, Hitler was reprehensible and all the rest. If we could engage for a moment in a little bit of critical thought here, history and the left and the media, they need a figure like Hitler. They need Hitler to have existed. They need Hitler to have existed in exactly the way that they said he did, which is as a villain, and there can never be an alternative opinion. You can never even second guess the historical record. And not only was he a villain, but he was pathetic, and he had one ball, and they have to emasculate him. It wasn't sufficient. He's unquestionably the great villain, but also he was this sad guy. And the reason they need it is because this is their shortcut to invalidating anything that is white solidarity, anything that is white racial consciousness, anything that is nationalist, anything that is traditionalist. Because, of course, what is always the knee-jerk reflexive impulse of the left when you talk about white consciousness, about the beauty of white people, the survival of white people? Oh, what are you? Adolf Hitler? What are you, a Nazi? And what is the one thing, you know, for an R-rated movie where it's graphic violence and nudity and all the rest, it's 18 and up. But they'll show you from the time you're 5 years old in every public school, now it's mandated in every public school, I think in many states, that they show the most graphic images of people in the camps. And, you know, never mind that, you know, some of them died from typhus, and never mind that some of them died from other things. They're going to show the propaganda reel. They're going to show the whole wartime, what they call atrocity propaganda. And look, you know, of course it happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I am saying that the left needs that to stop critical thinking. The left needs that to shut down conversation. And so while I would never go out there, and Hitler was a reprehensible guy and what he did was evil, but that's why they can never allow a conversation on it. Because if there was a conversation about, you know, well, what really happened? Who really was this guy? Can we have another position on it? Well, then the entire infrastructure, the entire mythology crumbles, because right now the left relies on that to have Antifa, to have left-wing ANCOM violence and all the rest, is because fascism is evil and it's taking over. And, you know, God forbid we had a strong and charismatic orator who led the nation in some less than liberal fashion. You know, God forbid that ever happened. So I disavow the 88, but, you know, I do understand where people are coming from, I guess, when they say something like that.
Well, you also left out one thing. If Hitler isn't the ultimate villain, then Stalin is.
True.
You know what I'm saying? So if you can always make Hitler the ultimate villain, then Stalin, for all of his 60 million people that he killed and for all of the ruin that he brought on his own country, he fought against the ultimate evil. So therefore he can get a pass. And therefore communism is not such a bad thing because it beat Hitler. So, I mean, when you guys on Worski Live had Aiden on, and Kevin Logan was going at her about, was it 4 million? Was it 6 million? Was it anything? And he kept saying, well, if you say it could have been 4 million, you're minimizing what happened. Therefore, you're engaging in some level of denial. And I came on and I said it then, I'll say it again now. Without asking those questions, scholarship cannot happen. Without scholarship, you get conspiracy theories. So if you can't ask those questions of how many people died, I don't care if it was 1 million or 6 million, it was horrible. You know what I'm saying? Like, is 1 million dying like not so bad, but 6 million is unspeakable? Like, no, millions of people dying is a bad thing, no matter what. If they're killed by a leader, it's a bad thing, no matter what. So I don't understand why anybody would be afraid of it. And this Holocaust industry that teaches the Holocaust to every young child out there is not just brainwashing, but it's doing something that enables them to grasp onto the horrible side of humanity. You know, they're able to know from that young age that whatever you do that can possibly be considered this, you know, you have to stop doing. So again, you can always point to, well, Stalin fought Hitler in World War II. So if from a young age you remember these horrible pictures of the camps, and you remember that Hitler was the ultimate villain and this horrible person who did all these horrible things, then as you're growing up, you're like, well, I don't want to be Hitler, so Stalin must have at least had a couple good ideas, or must have at least cared enough, because he went in and liberated the camps. He went in and fought the Nazis, you know. And this Holocaust industry, yes, there are lots of things to be learned from the Holocaust by a person who's able to engage in critical thought. And a child is not able to be engaged in critical thought. They're enabled to be scared the shit out of, which never works. All it does is lead to conspiracy theory later in life.
Absolutely. I suggest I read a few questions to you guys in the super chat, and then we can conclude. Bill Raffi asked, does Halsey support the Dome of the Rock being destroyed and Third Temple built? I don't know what that means.
I was actually just asked that like an hour ago by a friend of mine. No, I don't believe that the Third Temple should be built by man. I believe it's something that'll be built by God. No, I don't believe the Dome of the Rock should be there.
All right, and a challenge to Nick. Woke3 says, not how it works, Nick. Bishops are the highest clergy over their diocese. Pope position is greatly inflated, largely due to ages of Catholic Protestant debates. Pope's extra authority is very limited.
That's just simply not true. I mean, that's just simply not true. You know, you can go back to the gospel itself, and Jesus Christ did not give the keys of the kingdom to the bishops. Jesus Christ did not found the church on the rock of the bishops. He founded it on the Church of Rome, or the Bishop of Rome, which was Peter. And, you know, people say, oh, no, they actually gave it to all of them and all this other stuff. But, you know, fundamentally, it was Peter. And Peter, even the name Peter, which Jesus Christ changed his name to Peter, was a pun in the original language for rock. He was the rock, and then he became the Bishop of Rome. And so the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, not the bishop. So, you know, this is a lot of Protestant nonsense. You know, and Protestants will, they'll come at you for the sex scandal and these other things, but at the end of the day, the Catholic Church, the magisterium has not changed. You know, we have a pope here and there who's a little bit left-leaning, but the magisterium doesn't change. It's still hierarchical, still traditional, and you know, that's all right. Protestants, hey, maybe you're the one right sect of Protestantism, right? All the 500 other ones are all wrong, but you're the right one, right? So a lot of goofy stuff from them.
Joey says, Nick is always classy and will sway normies of the future. Fernando
I agree with that statement, actually. I agree with that statement.
All right. Yeah, there's lots of demand for this, like who will sway the normies. It's both fascinating and I enjoy participating to it. In fact, why did I hire Lauren Rose? Because I think she will sway the normies. However, it's also a childish view, because the reality is the normies may not even come up in the next generation. Everyone will be on YouTube, and it will all be different sorts of circles of people being habituated to different content creators. Fernando says, if Kurzweil is right, in 25 years, one little computer will be as powerful as 10 billion humans. AI will either supplant or supplement humans. I agree that they will supplement humans as long as we control them, and it doesn't matter if they're very intelligent. We can control a very intelligent AI. However, if we let them play with our genes, we're fucked. Keep that in mind. Mark Nanman says, Nick, if Pope Francis canonized Halsey as a saint, even though he was a Christ-rejecting Jew, would you accept or reject him as a heretic anti-pope? Well, that's kind of a weird question. Why would a pope do that?
Well, yeah, that literally wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. So, but you know, Protestants stay mad. Everybody's mad at the Catholics, and it's like you can be as mad and smug as you want, but you're going to hell. So, who gets the last laugh?
I love that. Glory for the King says, really great and insightful conversation. If discussions like this happened more often, America would truly be going places. And finally, Snow White says, white solidarity means everyone. We don't have a boomer problem. Don't let people divide us by age, gender, or religion. So, guys, it was really an awesome conversation, an awesome evening. I thank you both for being there. I thank all of the people in the chat who have participated with lots of energy in that discussion, sometimes taking sides, sometimes just praising our guests, sometimes insulting our guests. That's how it goes, and it's fine. Thank you all for being on the public space. Do you guys have anything to say in conclusion?
You can go ahead.
No, I think that's about it. It's I may still do America First later tonight. So for people that are watching, stay tuned for that. It still might happen.
So you didn't do it before? I was sure that you would go live before. All right, so let's go on Nick's channel and wait for his America First episode.
Well, I'm saying it might have. The problem, I was having internet issues with my computer, so I was planning on doing it, but then it didn't work out. So it may still happen.
When you mentioned the issues, I didn't realize that the issues were fatal to your stream. I thought they would just slow down your stream.
No, it was fatal. Very frustrating. So, but thanks for having us. So it was a great conversation.
Let me just show one thing. I normally don't, but on Wednesday on Luke Ford, me and him are going to be hosting Greg Cochran, which I think is going to be a really fun conversation. So if you guys come out Wednesday, we'd love to have you.
Do we know the time? Wednesday?
9 o'clock Eastern. I think 9 o'clock Eastern.
Perfect. Get Greg Cochran, and there will be Halsey and Luke Ford.
Yeah, it's on Luke's channel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for participating tonight, and have a great day.
Thank you.